project manager of the Creative Commons Clinic, which is part of the Centre of Excellence for Creative Innovation at QUT. She's here to talk to us today about the Creative Commons. It's a topic that's already been thematic through a lot of our discussion this morning and referred to in just about every presentation. So Jessica, it's great to have you here and we're looking forward to what you've got to tell us.
Good afternoon, everybody, and I'll try to be very short. About how long would you like me to talk for, besides -5 minutes? Yeah.
The shorter you talk, the more time we have for discussion.
I'll try to skip through as much. I should make clear that the Creative Commons Clinic is also, in effect, Creative Commons Australia. Creative Commons Australia is our unfunded bit, Creative Commons Clinic is our funded bit, and we all live a happy kind of dual existence in that identity. When I was preparing this talk, I wasn't sure what kind of room we'd have, if we would have a lot of people who know a lot about programming but not licensing, or who don't know anything about open source or whatever, or whether, and I wasn't sure if we would have already have covered what open source is and why we should be sharing things, or and whether we should jump forward to policy or what. So I've tried to do a little bit of everything, but I'm going to run really quickly, I hope, through most of it. So people should just ask questions where they want more information and stuff. To try to get us up to speed, I am going to go a little bit through what Creative Commons is, because it has been mentioned a lot, but I'm pretty much, I think, one of the lone lawyers, as opposed to programmers or IT people.
Any other lawyers in the room?
There you go. There you go, me and Neil, who works with me, are the lone lawyers in the room. So I'm here to talk to you about licensing, and I feel much more confident now that I've found that out, and why it is that it's very important to actually license these things, and public domain is good too. I'm not necessarily saying we shouldn't change the legislation too, but at this point it's going to be much quicker just to license your things. So very quickly, where does Creative Commons come from? Somebody asked me for a bit of history. Well, obviously, thanks to Hollywood, we all know that copyright and the internet didn't sit well together. Basically, the moment the internet came along, people started doing the kind of things that they'd always done in their bedrooms. They started doing, they started sharing them with 2 billion of their closest friends. And they were the kind of things that a lot of people have been doing in their bedrooms, sort of making fun of politicians, making mixtapes, that kind of thing. But not only were they sharing them with 2 billion of their closest friends, but they were also using other people's stuff to do it. So rather than turning around to my friend and telling them a knock-knock joke, I made, that made fun of George Bush, I, took a picture of George Bush and I took a song, a very famous song, both of which are copyrighted, and I turned it into a little animation video. And, rather than telling my friends how cute my baby was when he was dancing around the kitchen, I took a video clip of him dancing to Prince's, one of Prince's songs, put it up on YouTube, and then had it taken down because you could hear in a really, really bad, grainy, and completely almost incomprehensible manner Prince's song in the background. So these all of a sudden, the internet copyright hit each other, and this is in relation to content, of course, as opposed to code. Now, there are already people, before the World Wide Web came along, there were already people who were trying to share things, in an internet-y type environment, who were called programmers. And they'd come up with this great idea that when you're trying to share something between a whole lot of people, rather than having each of those people come and ask you permission, one at a time, it was a great idea to actually give them all permission in advance. You just put a license on something that said, you can do this with it. And it didn't say, I don't own copyright in this. It just said, I'm going to let you do this without coming and bothering me because I think you're annoying. And I just want you to play with it, that kind of thing. And so along came a whole pile of US academics, and they said, wow, I wonder if we can do the same things with content. All this stuff that ordinary users, people who aren't lawyers, who aren't IT geeks, who are part of a really big community, all this stuff that they want to use, and who might be corporate bodies. They don't have to be tiny. They don't have to be kids in their bedroom. Can we do that with that kind of stuff? And so, lo and behold, I missed my favourite slide, which is this meant a lot of people started to ignore copyright. Some people just said, let's get rid of copyright, or I'm just going to pretend it doesn't exist. But that doesn't work if you're a government body or a school or a library or anybody who has to kind of be seen to be obeying the law, and who has to manage their own content and, that kind of thing. So along came these academics who said, surely there's a better way we can do. They'd been trying to change the legislation for quite a while to let these things happen. but A, that wasn't happening anytime soon, and B, the legislation's it's a giant sledgehammer. It's a pretty blunt-edged tool, and that's why we have all kinds of different levels of law. Why you have legislation, why you have case law, why you have judges, and why you have private law, why you have contracts, to let individuals make their own decisions about what will work in exactly their circumstances, because you can't cover every circumstance in the legislation. And that's how we end up with a 700-page bloody Copyright Act, when people do try to cover every single circumstance in a piece of legislation, and an exception that goes for 2 pages long. Anyway, that's my other beef. So along comes Creative Commons. A whole group of US, of course, based copyright academics, with a couple of Europeans talking to them, most notably Lawrence Lessig, says, let's try doing this with content. And so they created a system whereby you could give permissions in advance for people to make certain uses of your copyright. You weren't saying, I don't own copyright in this stuff. You weren't giving up all your rights. But you were just taking out some of the bureaucratic processes of them getting permission from you. So some really key things about CC that is one of the reasons why it's risen to the top a little bit out of many licenses that do similar things that are all very good. But one of the reasons why it's become so prominent is that it has tried to standardise stuff. It's tried to make stuff as simple and straightforward and not one size fits, simple and straightforward and recognisable as possible, rather than every individual person having to write their own licence. Very good idea, of course, to try to have a few licences that you can get familiar with and then just reuse them over and over and over again. They're designed for safe sharing, but as well as standardising, we didn't try to. This is one thing that Creative Commons realised very early on, is that unlike the GPL population and most of the computing thing, we were trying to cater to a much larger, more diverse population, people who didn't have nearly as many common interests, and who might be a big giant corporation, might be a kid in their bedroom, might be a struggling musician, that kind of thing. So we decided to make it flexible rather than choosing one license, GPL, which sets kind of a set standard and had very good reasons for doing that. Creative Commons instead went the other way and went, we'll give people some options. We'll let people make their own decisions about how their stuff should be licensed. So it's flexible, easy to use and understand, and applies the same anywhere in the world like most of the stuff. So anyway, these are our licenses. Those of you who are quick can see that there are 4 basic elements in there, 4 things that are repeated over and over in the licenses. And you can mix and match these 4 license elements, we call them, to create 6 licenses. And they give you everything from attribution only, which means you can do anything with my stuff, including put it in an ad, in a Hollywood movie, whatever you like, remix it, change it, cut it up, as long as you attach my name to it. So that's the broadest of the CC licenses. Right down to the most narrow, which is the one on the bottom, attribution non-commercial no derivatives, which says you can move it around, you can send it to other people, but you can't change it and you can't use it for anything commercial. So we kind of call that the advertising license. It's what Hollywood movies are using for their previews now. Not all of them, obviously, but increasing numbers of Hollywood movies are using exactly that license on their previews, because it's a no-brainer. It's just share it with as many people as you can, but don't do anything else with it. So we aim to be flexible. We give people options. But of course that makes it harder to choose. So basically we wanted it all to be very simple, everybody to be able to use it. So Creative Commons came up with a number of features that are aimed to making it easier. And this is where I'm going to start getting into, these are the kind of things you need to think about even if you're not using Creative Commons. If you're writing your own system and stuff like that, think about these kind of steps. Steal ideas from us. We love it. Everything we have is under a Creative Commons license. You can take our licenses and rewrite them if you like. But just take the word Creative Commons off it because it'll just confuse people. So anyway, one of the big key features that I'd say makes Creative Commons once again a bit different from a lot of the other things is the license generator. You can see if we hide these fields, as this tells you we can, normally I'd have 2 slides, but I thought in the interest of time. You can see there's 2 questions. You answer those 2 questions and you will be picking between these 6 different licenses. Just automatically by answering 2 questions, you can work out which of the 6 licenses is right for you. So that's great. Ordinary person comes, says yes, no, maybe, and they have the right license for them. The other really great element of Creative Commons that makes it much more usable and malleable and stuff is the metadata aspect. tagging aspect. So these fields that I was hiding before from you are a brand new feature that even those who are familiar with Creative Commons might not have noticed. They came around in the middle of last year. And that lets you embed, like, basically information into the metadata that comes with your license about your work. So you can put your name into it. You can put the license it's under obviously goes in there automatically, but you can also put, you know, name of the work, name of where your website, and most importantly, where you can get extra permission. So if you put a non-commercial license on your work, then you can put information in there that can tell people where they can get a commercial license from you. So this is where you start trying to blend the worlds of open access, you know, open content, sharing your stuff with the world, and still having a business model. So, you know, you're using the open access tools, you're using the kind of metadata tools that you've got and stuff to publicise your work by putting it under an open thing, sending it out there. But then also, while you're sending out, making sure people will always know where they can come back and pay you for it if they want to. So this kind of element is the kind of thing you want to think about when you're making your stuff available as a government organisation or an educational body or something like that. You know, how can you, you know, really make sure that all the information that people need is readily available? It's all very well to just free stuff, but how can you really get it out there and get them coming back to you and all those kind of things? So that's really great. And one of the things that, you know, as I say, I think is great for Creative Commons. So you can see that this is the metadata I was talking about. It puts all the information in there. If you have a web page or something the stuff's on, you can put that in there if you're technically adept. If you're not, you can just like copy and paste. You don't get nearly as many benefits, but it's fine. So from there, you can see the little license button. That should, in theory, is if you put your metadata in properly, appear at the bottom of the page. You click through it, and you get to the next feature I want to talk about that I think people should be emulating. Which lots of people are emulating, which is the license deed. Now, this is basically something that this is another thing that Creative Commons came up with, which is basically, you know, say rather than giving everybody a 7-page copyright license, give them a 1-page summary that gives them a link to the 7-page copyright license. And this is very important, once again, with the whole layman audience and the fact that we're trying to be understandable for everybody. The license is there. Everybody should read the license, that kind of thing. But this gives them an idea straight in advance how they can use it. And you can see that because of those little metadata things I was talking about, my name appears in it, where you can get extra permissions appears, those kind of things. So these are all basically, these are basically kind of the things that make Creative Commons very useful, and why, you know, sort of, I would argue it's quite a good standardised system to use, which is, you know, metadata, easy to choose, metadata, license deed, and the final one is that metadata, that stuff that's back on the page that you've inputted in your thing, can be read by machines. And this is the brilliant thing. The machine knows what license is on your work, which means that the machine can search for it, which means you can have search engines look specifically for material that you can use for commercial purposes or that you can remix or whatever you like. And this is the big benefit that, that you really get out of actually the Creative Commons licenses, is that a lot of people have now built those engines. Google Advanced Search, you can search for stuff by license. Firefox has it built in. You know, hundreds of websites like Flickr and you know, the Internet Archive and all that kind of thing, they'll search the thing specifically on license, and that's looking for this piece of metadata. And there are a lot of people looking at trying to get this kind of stuff up, you know, standardised DOI and stuff like that, so that you'll be able to do this with other licensing systems as well. It won't just be Creative Commons that has it. But at the moment, it is Creative Commons that has it. It is just at the moment. But hopefully very soon, there'll be an opportunity for you to have non-CC licenses that can still be found by people like Google and stuff on the basis of their license. But this is another very important thing. If you're going to talk about open access, how can people find your stuff? You know, how can they locate that this is something they can use for these commercial purposes, things like that. So anyway, just to let you know, it is big. You know, it is the biggest content license out there, as opposed to code and that kind of thing. Over a year, almost 2 years ago now, there were 140 million things out there was the best figures available. They haven't got new figures because they're trying to make them better and that kind of thing. But I do know that there were more than 60 million pictures on Flickr under CC licenses when I looked the other day, and that's an exact number that you can know. As you can see, all of them are by. That's because, for those of you who are clever might have noticed, every single one of them has the by attribution. So all of them require you to attribute the author, and that's a standard, thing of Creative Commons. You always have to say who the author is, and that's just because everybody wanted it. After the first year, everybody chose it, so we just made it compulsory. And most of them are non-commercial. That is a bit controversial in the open access community. Some people are, sort of very big fans of everything being available for commercial use. But I would say Creative Commons is kind of the pragmatic end of, one of the more pragmatic members anyway of the open access community. And we basically just said people want this. And you can see most people do use it. And people pretty much are a lot more comfortable, and this is everybody from government corporations to small individuals, sharing their stuff for, to allow non-commercial use than they are to allow commercial use. And often if they allow it for non-commercial use, they'll gradually move to commercial use and that kind of thing. But it is very important not just to assume that the tightest license is the best for you, because that's the situation we're in at the moment. Everybody assumes full copyright is the best thing. But when you're licensing your stuff, and you do have to think carefully about whether or not you really do want to restrict non-commercial stuff, particularly, once again, this is probably the thing I'm harping on today, government information, because that's really, I think, where the 2020 summit's likely to be most used. But particularly if you're a government organisation, restricting commercial use, possibly not really the smartest way to go. But it depends on exactly what your material is, so case-by-case basis, all that kind of thing. So CC, as well as having the license and stuff, we have all these other projects. There's one that's all about commercialising stuff. There's one that's about marking stuff that's in the public domain, actually as in the public domain. Because, how many times have we gone to something, an old black and white picture on a website and there's absolutely no information attached to it, we have no idea. So there's all kinds of stuff going on, but we won't worry about that. Important things that CC is not. It's not anti-copyright. It's, we're a copyright system, written by copyright lawyers. We're just trying to provide tools so that people can better manage their own copyright. Pretty much the way standardised copyright runs at the moment, it's too hard and complex for people to manage on their own normally. Like, you have to really put a lot of effort in, a lot of thought in, if you want to even just write a copyright licence that's going to work. Even if you just want to say, yes, you can share this with your friends. If you want it to be legally enforceable and everybody to be certain about what's going on, it's a real minefield. So CC is just trying to provide tools for people to be able to manage their own copyright without having to, just default to Disney copyright, basically. Not anti-commercial. There are lots of ways that you can earn money and still put your material out there, and that's come up a lot in the open source discussions we've already had today. That business models, the open access and business are not incompatible, and in fact lots and lots of people are working out really great ways to make money from open access. And in fact, these are the people who have realised that a lot of the old business models may be not working so well anymore, and that maybe it's time to stop flogging the old ones and to start looking at what new options are available. So these are all options for you. And it's not right for every situation as well. This is a big thing for Creative Commons. We don't argue that everybody should be using it. We just argue that more people should be using it than they're currently. That people do automatically assume that full copyright is the best. That's what they need. And they often don't think about what they want people to actually be able to do with the material. Again, if you're a government organisation, do you actually want people to be able to print it and share it with each other and all that kind of thing? Yeah, these are really important decisions that you have to make, and not just default to 100% copyright, which is why it's very important to put a licence on all your stuff. I don't have to go in this crowd through reasons for sharing, but you can see there really are really great reasons for sharing, and all kinds of examples of people who are sharing material for all these different reasons. People who are taking all the stuff in their filing cabinets and putting it up online and suddenly finding business models, or at least collaboration, or some kind of value from this material that was dying before, those kind of things. But I'm going to put my beef in, which is the legal clarity and reduced admin. One of the great things about putting a license on your stuff is that people will normally try to obey the license. If you put something out there under full copyright, people, A, they don't know what full copyright means, they don't know what it allows them to do, and B, if they do know, they think it's pretty unreasonable because it doesn't let them even print it off, and that kind of thing. So they will just ignore it. But if you put a reasonable license on your stuff, something that spells out what you're happy for them to do and that people think, you know, makes you sound like a good guy and you're being fairly reasonable, people are generally... I don't have statistical evidence, I have to admit. But anecdotally and, you know, instinctually, there seems to be evidence that people will obey these things as much as they can. They'll put your name on it. Like, you can see my slides or the copyright, or the fair dealing things I had at the top. I didn't put any names on, you know, my piracy is stealing slide. But the little green picture that I've got in the background, that's got an attribution because the license said I should attribute, and so I did. Those kind of things. So putting a license on stuff is a really good idea in many situations. Just putting it up on the net isn't quite enough. Benefits of CC over writing your own license, a lot of the ones we've already talked about. It is a standardised system. People now recognise what it means. It's got all those lovely little pretty symbols that you can look at and go, oh, yes, I've seen this before and I know what it means. It's also, you know, being written by lots and lots of different lawyers and that kind of thing. You can have your lawyers look at it and make sure they're okay with it and that kind of thing, but it's all out there. Compatibility, very big issue, making sure that particularly once there are certain elements, the share-alike element that most people in this room will probably be familiar with, a share-alike copyleft, it's got different names, does create compatibility issues, so it's good if everybody's using licenses that are as close to each other as possible, rather than writing their own licenses every time. Don't reinvent the wheel, you know, don't create 2 million licenses when one will do. All kinds of arguments for why you might want to go with a standardised system as opposed to writing your own. On the other hand, there will be circumstances in which you need, where you have specific requirements, you only want to share with specific community, you only want to share for a specific amount of time. So you do have to put thought into these things. But as I'm going to say in a second anyway, Neil's report found out a little while ago, Neil's report for the Queensland government, they estimated that about 85% of the stuff produced by government is suitable for being put under, under open licenses. Most stuff produced really will be able to be shared. It's just about making conscious decisions about where that is available instead of just defaulting to one position. So yeah, the ones that Tom said to me, say what Creative Commons thinks, 2020 can do for it, and that kind of thing. Our wish list that I came up with last night, I have to admit, without talking to any of my colleagues, so don't quote me on this, as far as Creative Commons in the immediate, actually not over the next 20 years, this is a much more immediate list. I wonder what the next 20 years list would be. Is getting a lot of government information out there as much as possible. If not under our licenses, under an open access license. We're not prejudiced, just getting it out there so people can reuse it, not just see it. Open education resources, getting a lot of stuff out there for schools to use. That's that's once again another no-brainer, basically. Most people are happy for schools to use their stuff. Currently the copyright law doesn't really work very well for schools to be able to do that. Wouldn't it be great if more people explicitly told schools that they can use their stuff? We'd love to update the current systems, and when I say systems I mean all kinds of legislative and private licensing systems to remove the barriers for private creators to, basically make better use of their own copyright. There are a lot of barriers out there in terms of big publishing companies who insist on certain sign-ons or, or standardised, collective licensing systems that require you to use exactly one model and not anything else. That currently prevent people from actually being able to manage their own copyright if they want to. And that leads me into the last one, which is, of course, changing the legislation. We all would love to do it. But I don't think the last two are likely to happen anytime soon, or at least it would take a long time to talk about that. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the first two, which is getting more government stuff out there and getting more educational stuff out there. Once again, not going to read through the slide. You can all read, I presume. Basically, and there has been a lot of discussion of this today. There seems to be a fair amount of knowledge in this room about the benefits to getting public-funded material back out to the public. I just want to point out, say the sentence nobody has said so far as I can see, is that, except for maybe Pierre a little bit, which is there are a lot of economists who have proved that it is better for the economy to not sweat the nickels and dimes. Basically, don't spend the administrative fees and all this kind of thing to try to, make people pay, every time they want a map. Instead, put it out there and let them use it, even commercially, let companies build on it, and all of a sudden, lo and behold, the economy itself gets better. So rather than you earning a few extra dollars, which are normally really taken up with the kind of admin and stuff you need to actually control this stuff, then the economy gets better. I'm going to admit, not in every situation, but 90% of the time. 85%, according to Neil's report, of the time, that is the truth. So that's the big one. And the other big thing that I don't think has been mentioned today is consistency and transparency in licensing policies. Another thing coming out of Neil's report, which is, the reason why I've got Queensland Government there, I couldn't manage to make his little symbol copy, unfortunately, because I don't have the technical know-how. But they, consistency and transparency at the moment in Australia in particular, because, everybody keeps talking about America and there's no licensing and isn't that great and it's all in public domain and stuff. The problem in Australia is that there is no consistent approach to how we license our stuff. So having copyright in government stuff is not necessarily bad. It does allow the government to, for instance, keep things open if they want to, rather than in America there's a lot of problems with big corporate entities locking up government stuff, and the only place you end up being able to get it is through these big corporate entities, even though it's in the public domain and stuff like that. So Australian government has a real power, has a lot of power in the fact that they own copyright in their stuff, and they should be utilising it. But the problem is at the moment they're utilising it in a completely haphazard way, and everybody's got their own licences, every single department does, and that means that when we have a major water, crisis, nobody can use each other's data. Nobody can share information. No one researcher, down in, Burke can get hold of all the different data, run it through his little system and work out the solution, because it's all inconsistent. So consistency and transparency in how government material can be used. Who knows how legislation can be used in Australia? All these legislative databases, OSLE and Scale Text and all this kind of thing. But, what is actually the standard policy on licensing, on using those things? So just as a bit of example, gone forward one. Some really great examples of how people have been using open content licensing for governments. Creative Archive License Group. I imagine a lot of people here might have heard of this. But basically the BBC and a lot of other archives in Britain decided to put out stuff under a license based on Creative Commons, not actually our license, but we're happy with that. For reuse. So the BBC put about 500, mainly audio but also visual, so film and sound clips out, and they said you can reuse this. It wasn't even just like you can look at this or you can send it to your friends. It said you can remix this. And so that's a great initiative that has now been copied in the Netherlands and Denmark and Germany, and I'm sure there are other people looking at it, and we're certainly very keen on having it here in Australia. Isn't actually here in Australia yet, but there's possibilities, that kind of thing. National Institute of Health, this is a very interesting one that ties into a lot of how some of the earlier conversation about funding bodies' roles in all of this. National Institutes of Health in America requires that any research funded by them be made available under an open access system within 6 to 12 months of its publication. And that's the kind of decision that can come from above, as we all keep saying, the decisions have to come from above. This is what this is about, giving something to the government that it can do to try to help improve these situations. Well, the government as a major funder, I'm sure the biggest funder of research in Australia, has the power to do these kind of things. You don't have to say immediately open. I'd rather immediately open, but you don't have to say that. If people are worried it's going to undermine their business model, then, give them a bit of leeway, get them to justify their business model, that kind of thing. But just don't leave it locked up for the life of the author plus 70 years. It's ridiculous. National Institutions of Health, really great way of using their own power. We love that one. This little dog in the tucker box picture here, which is a bit dark, unfortunately. You can't really read him very well. This comes from the National Library of Australia, so I've got a nice little local example. Own initiative, Click and Flick. And this is how open content licensing can work for you as a large entity rather than the other way around. And this is where we get a little bit into the user-generated, which we haven't really touched on a lot today, even though one of the main reasons why open licensing, and I'm going to say this just because we haven't touched on it, one of the main reasons why open licensing really has taken off is because people are starting to want to do things like Wikipedia. They're starting to want to, access the wisdom of the masses and that kind of thing, and make use of this stuff. And you just can't do that on a full copyright basis. You need to have some kind of sharing mechanism. You need a collaborative licensing scheme of some sort in place if you're really going to start doing this stuff. So this is what the National Library did. Yeah, I'm going to finish any second, don't worry. National Library did a great thing where you as a private photographer can stick your photos onto Flickr and label them, just use Flickr's standard system, label them as being part of the National Library's collection, and lo and behold, they are part of the National Library's collection. So you have contributed your photos to the National Collection for posterity. And last time I heard, I think they had about 20,000 photos had been donated in 2 years. What library do you know that's had 20,000 photos donated in the course of 2 years recently? And the great thing, they were contemporary photos, and not just old grey black and white things, which is what, of course, most of their collection is. Out of, your grandma's died and you pass them on to the National Library. And it's been a great initiative, and as part of that, they're encouraging, not requiring. They've tried requiring, and they've wound it back from that, but encouraging people to use CC licenses because it works for them. It means they have all the rights they need to be able to reuse these works and that kind of thing. All the rights the Copyright Act hasn't quite got rights for libraries. Creative Commons can give them. So anyway, I won't go into education because we're running out of time, but there has been a lot of talk about Government Day, and I think education is equally important, if only because it's a good thin edge of the wedge. People will often license their stuff for educational use and not for others, and it's very important for education bodies. It gets back to the whole thing, somebody, I've forgotten who said before, where they were saying, we were paying huge amounts of money for all this stuff we created ourselves. That was right back at the beginning, it was Lawrence Cram. That's what schools are doing as well. So getting education resources, so things like, study guides and lesson plans and all that kind of thing out there for others to use, great idea. But in Australia, who owns the copyright to anything produced by a teacher? The state, or perhaps a Catholic Education Council, whoever's employing them, basically, which means you need, once again, a policy to come down from above to set these kind of things in place. Individuals can't really be very active in this domain. There's a whole lot of different really cool things that are being done. You can see some of them. NEALS is an Australian initiative, but it's a bit of an intranet, just sharing with other NEALS members, and we'd far rather they shared with the rest of the world too. So, what do we need? And this is, I actually stuck this slide in today after all the discussion we've been having this morning. The most important things to try to get out of this, I think, is that the government really needs to have standards on how government material in particular is licensed. You need uniform licenses. It doesn't have to be CC. I'd advocate that, but uniform licenses, uniform policies, just everything needs to be made a lot more streamlined. You need the policies and you need the money to implement them. You need them to actually be implemented, not just sitting there, which is always a big problem. I've worked in public service most of my life, so I know that. And you need education. People need to know that they exist, and they need to know what they're doing when they use them. So there you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jessica. We've got a pre-booked question about how it relates to TV. We are running seriously behind. We're going to break now for coffee, and we're going to keep that nice and tight and come back, and I'm going to talk pleadingly with our final three presenters to keep it tight. I think we're probably going to blow out by a good half an hour at the end, so we'll get away by 5. Our program was due to finish at 4:30, so that means each of the presenters will just need to take a few minutes off their time. But please, presenters, let me know if that's an issue for you. And no presenters are allowed to go until you come and see, because I have something for you. George, you've got a question for what you said?
Oh, yes.
And then we'll have a break.
The rebroadcasting of live free-to-air television seems to be out of kilter with the Broadcast Act. Whilst an institution like the ANU can have 60 broadcast TV channels from anything we can see in the sky, as well as ABC and SBS, they must
Wow, that's a big question. Well, that gets us into the realm of, I would say, legislative change. I mean, I don't think it's 2020's place to tell commercial broadcasters that they should put open access licences on all of their material, even though I think there's possibly some argument that business model-wise it might not be the worst thing for them. So yeah, that would probably have to require legislative planning. There is actually a retransmission licence, but it's for very specific circumstances. I think this is me coming from my background as a legislator more than my current identity as a CC person. I would say that it's possibly not very likely you'd get that very soon. But also I would say that, you know, the best way to do that would be probably broadening what educational institutions can do rather than giving everybody the power. I don't know. That's probably too big a question to be answered right now. Really, except that copyright legislation reform would be great.
Neil, one quick point.
Very quick observation. You're not a broadcaster. It's purely a matter of definition. If government wants to change the definition of what a broadcaster is, it's an approved definition, such as the ABC, etc., then they are a broadcaster. If not, then you're not. And universities, etc., are not. So it's purely a matter of public policy and how it's reflected in the Act. At the present time, they're not covered by those provisions. If government wants to change the policy, they can. The other thing about CC that I want to mention is government policy relating to access to government information and the rights of reuse of government information. They're some of the policy issues here.
And I will just acknowledge that Neil is by far, I'd say, Australia's leading expert on government, on open access to government material and the arguments for and against it and all the arguments against it and why they don't mean anything. So talk to Neil if you want to know.
Can I say that's the perfect segue into our next presentation, but let's go and have some coffee first.